Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're putting on our financial historians' hats to understand a huge, unfolding shift in the global money system. And trust me, this affects everyone.
Now, this isn't some wild theory from the internet. That's a direct quote from the person in charge of America's finances. It's a signal, a very clear one, that the rules of money are being intentionally changed.
And the rules have changed dramatically before. So the big question is, what does this new shift mean for your money? To really get where we're going, we first have to understand how we got here. So let's start with a tale of two systems. First, the one backed by gold that ran the world for decades. And then we'll talk about the moment it all changed, which created the system we're all living in today. This timeline really tells the whole story. It kicks off in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which pegged the US dollar directly to gold. Simple enough. Then boom, 1971, the Nixon shock. That link to gold was completely severed and the dollar became a fiat currency backed by, well, trust. Fast forward to 2022, and a single event, the freezing of Russian reserves, shattered that trust and kicked the global move away from the dollar into high gear. Now, this system based on trust gave the US what a French finance minister famously called an exorbitant privilege. It's basically the incredible perk of being able to borrow super cheaply and run massive deficits just because the whole world needs your currency. For almost 80 years, this has been quietly propping up the American standard of living, but that foundation, it's really starting to crack. And if you think this kind of thing can't happen, well, history has a very clear precedent. Just look at the British pound. It was the world's currency, but it declined for reasons that should sound eerily familiar: mounting debt and eroding trust. Those are the exact same pressures the dollar is facing today. The pound went from total dominance to just 2% of reserves. The dollar, it's already dropped from 71% down to 57%, and that trend line is pointing in one direction. All right, so what are the specific pressures causing the whole system to fracture right now? Let's break it down. There are two critical issues that are forcing this global realignment. The first crack is just pure math. The US national debt is north of $36 trillion. It's growing by about $5 billion every single day. Think about this. The interest payments on that debt now cost more than the entire US military budget. This isn't politics, it's just unsustainable arithmetic. The second crack is geopolitical. In 2022, the US and its allies froze $300 billion of Russia's reserves. That single action sent a massive shockwave through every central bank on the planet. It was proof that dollar-based assets weren't just assets. They could be turned into weapons at a moment's notice. And it sparked one simple, game-changing question in finance ministries from Beijing to Brazil. If it can happen to Russia, can it happen to us? That question changed everything. It turned the slow, quiet move away from the dollar into a frantic sprint for national security. So how is the rest of the world reacting? Well, you don't have to guess. The hard data shows a very clear and dramatic pivot away from paper promises and toward physical, hard assets. And central banks aren't just talking, they are acting big time. Before 2022, they were buying around 473 tons of gold a year. By 2023, that number exploded to over 1,200 tons. They more than doubled their buying. For the first time in modern history, they're choosing gold, a physical asset with nobody else's promise attached to it, over US government debt. That's a huge shift. This chart really visualizes what's been called the dollar's death by 1,000 cuts. Back in 1999, the dollar was 71% of all global reserves. Today, it's down to 57%. Now, that 14-point drop might not sound like a catastrophe, but it represents trillions upon trillions of dollars being purposefully moved away from US assets and into other things. And this isn't just a few countries hedging their bets. A massive block of nations, the BRICS, is building a completely parallel financial system from the ground up. I mean, they now represent 45% of the world's GDP. They've built their own payment system to rival SWIFT, they're settling trade in their own currencies, and oh yep, they've jacked up their gold reserves by 55% in just 6 years. They are building a world that can operate without the US dollar. Okay, I know this all feels very high level, very geopolitical, but it drills right down to your wallet, to your savings. So the real question is, what can a regular person actually do when these tectonic plates are shifting? Well, before we talk about what to do, let's talk about what not to do.
The sources point to three major risks. There's the cash trap, just holding on to an asset that's losing its value, the dollar concentration trap, basically having all your eggs in one basket, and finally, the timing trap, trying to perfectly predict when to make a move, which is, let's be honest, pretty much impossible. So, knowing those risks, here are three prudent ways to navigate this reset. Number one, own real assets, stuff you can actually touch that tends to hold its value when currencies get weaker. Think precious metals, commodities, real estate. Two, diversify geographically. Get some exposure to economies that might actually benefit from a weaker dollar. And three, reduce unproductive debt. In times of currency turmoil and inflation, being heavily in debt is like carrying a giant anchor in a storm. The idea here isn't to panic, it's to be prudent. You know, the last great monetary shift back in 1971 created a generation of winners and a generation of losers. History is absolutely echoing right now. This transition is already happening. Being prepared for the new rules of the game is what separates those who benefit from those who end up bearing the costs. So the real question is, which one will you be?